Okay, halfway through the show, we are now at album number 4, which Matt's going to run down, and then Josh is going to start us with. So take the
this
floor.
is Simple Minds. The second time we're covering Simple Minds with New Gold Dream, 81, 82, 83, 84. Comes in at number 133 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 13 in 1982, number 872 of all time. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, but it is New Simple Minds' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. We had previously covered Empires in Dance and A Cold Listen, which is the 6th highest rated album. So we're kind of doing the bookends here. And Simple Minds is ranked number 409 of all overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
So I might be in the minority here this week. I'm not sure Simple Minds is kind of the group for me. I was a little underwhelmed by this album. Obviously, the 80s are the electronic decade, it seems like. This album is full on electronic and synth based. It's also pretty much a dance album too most of the time. They use a lot of echoing and effects in their songs, and this kind of felt like maybe like a chill wave type of album or chill electronic vibe that they were going for. But I kept losing my attention listening to it. It kind of got lost, or it easily receded into the back of my head when I was listening to it. It kind of alternates between up tempo and maybe slower ballads. It feels a little atmospheric at times, and I was trying to think back from the first album that we listened to of theirs, how this was different. I think this one is kind of a bit more upbeat and maybe happier in tone than the previous album, maybe a little bit more pop oriented, but there's something about them that just kind of doesn't work for me. And I was also trying to wonder like what the singles were off of this album, and if they're another band like how I was talking about New Order and not really knowing them. Is Simple Minds the same, as popular as them, and they were just like this British era of electronic music that was really popular that I somehow overlooked or just don't connect with. I'm not saying that Simple Minds, I feel the same way about Simple Minds as I do about New Order, but I think I like New Order's vibe a bit more. But yeah, Simple Minds, this album just didn't connect with me for some reason.
Yeah, this was as much a hit and miss album as any album we've covered in the 80s so far, because there were some tracks I really liked on this album. New Gold Dream was a really, really good song. Promised You a Miracle I liked quite a bit. Hunter and the Hunted was another song. And then there were some songs that I really didn't like. I was not a fan of the 2-part combo, Big Sleep and Somebody Up There Likes You. It was a 10-minute sort of detachment period for me of it. Colors Fly and Catherine Wheel, the number 2 song, was, it was okay, but there just was no heft to it. New Gold Dream was as good a song as I think I listened to this entire week. It was really enjoyable. It was that 80s sound, and definitively 80s, and this whole album was 80s, but it was the 80s in a way that was both nostalgia and it had an emotional resonance that sometimes there was a sterility to the tracks that didn't connect with me, I think. I also should point out how very, very different this album is from the other Simple Minds album that we covered. This one I felt represented it's a 3-year period ahead, and just like that one album we covered in the 80s seemed very much couched in what was going on around them in 1980. This sounds like what was going on around them in 1983. I think it's interesting that, then later, right, they do the Breakfast Club song like 3 years later after that, and they seem to be chasing the zeitgeist, so to speak, in their different albums. And it was funny how much this album fit. Like if you had told me when was this album recorded, I would have been like, I don't know, like 1983 probably. And when the other one we listened to, I would have said, when was that recorded? I would have said, oh, like around 1980. And it would have fit perfectly because these sound like the years themselves in terms of music. But I'm curious to hear what Matt thinks of this album. I would say this is the quintessential classic thumbs in the middle album for me, because half of the album I enjoyed quite a bit and has re-listenability to me at a high level, and then half of it, it just washed over me and fell out the other side. So what'd you think, Matt?
Yeah, I'm probably going to be the highest on this record. Sounds like I do, but I definitely agree with what you're saying, John, to an extent, because I think that there's some big highs on here. I think the opening track, "Someone Somewhere in Summertime," is a great opening song. I agree. "Promise You a Miracle" is a really good, another great single pop song. "New Gold Dream," that's great too. I really like "Glittering Prize" as well. So I think that there's some really good upbeat songs. I will say, yes, the instrumental "Somebody Up There Likes You" is fine. It's a little bit filler here for me. I wouldn't say that I hated it or anything like that. I mean, it's a step down. Probably "Big Sleep" is as well. So I agree with you there, John. But I wouldn't say that I'm as it's as big of a gap for me as it might be for you. I did like the variety on here. I liked the kind of them mixing up the more upbeat dance poppy stuff with the more introspective, more melancholy kind of songs. I like the last two tracks, as closing, more of a melancholy kind of feel with Hunter and the Hunted and King is White and In the Crowd. So I didn't know any of these tracks, and I really didn't know any Simple Minds. Yeah. I would agree with you guys. I think Josh said, this is definitely a poppier record than the previous one that we had covered, which I think I like that one the most as well. So I can definitely see influence of bands that would come later on in the the 2000s. With a band like Cut Copy came to mind. If you guys know them at all, they got very similar. There's a lot of bands in that area that kind of had very a lot of, they revived the synth and the dance and the that type of sound. So I heard some of that in there as well, which and I like some of those bands too. So yeah, I just think I think that when they hit really high for me, I think it's great. And the stuff that's a little bit more meandering, I don't find as unpalatable maybe as you guys do. But I do see what you're saying. It might be in that regard a little uneven. But there's plenty on here for me to give this an easy thumbs up. I did enjoy this, and I'm interested. I'd be interested to hear more Simple Minds. I mean, it's a band that I just knew really. I mean, God, could I name another Simple Minds song other than the Breakfast Club, that "Don't You Forget About Me"? I don't think I could have. Yeah. This is a band that probably would have confused a lot back in the day with Simply Red, just because of the word "simple" in it. You know what I mean? Like another British band. So yeah, I don't. John, was this a? Where did we get this one from? Why are we listening to this?
This would be a post-punk flashcards.
Post-punk flashcard. Interesting. Post-punk.
Mm-hmm. It's also included in the 1001 albums.
Is it?
It's 1001. Okay. It's 1001 too. So I think that's actually where it might have originally been drawn by. Yeah.
Got it.
So.
Got it.
But it's I wasn't anti this album, Matt. It didn't turn me off. I think just some of the tracks I was disappointed that they didn't hook me. The iciness kind of kept me out on those. And there were other tracks where whether it be like a bass line or the synth sound was challenging but inviting at the same time. And I think it's just it's always tough for me with synth-driven music to connect, because there's an artificiality that just like I hear and just naturally it doesn't pull me. You know what I mean? It's like my first thought on any sort of synth-heavy thing is to like keep a distance from it, to look at it from afar, like an eclipse kind of. And so it kind of like I need to hear it play out to be invited in, and the tracks where it didn't, I stared at it from afar and then I kind of walked away, right? Where the other ones I was staring at afar and then I walked closer to it. That's how. And the second time I listened to the album, it definitely resonated more with me too, because I walked to more of the tracks at that time as opposed to just the 2 or 3 that caught me right off the bat. And so it became a 50-50 album for me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, and this album does not sound like the song from The Breakfast Club either.
No, nothing.
That is, I mean, that's clearly that gets away from the synth based and is much warmer, to use John's kind of description, than this album in my mind.
Yeah,
it's still synthy, that song, but in a much more accessible way, tied to like mainstream pop music, right?
Well, it's not a dance song. A lot of these songs on here and the previous one is kind of more of like a dance type, hypnotic kind of looping, beat or melody going on. That other one's.
I could see somebody
so?
did that, that like I said la 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 la.
Yeah, but
that's like
I'm not saying
dance,
I'm not saying you can't dance to that. I'm just saying that's not. This is more electronic dance music. That's
it's not got that like dun 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 dun. Yeah, that like where it's the rhythm.
But I see what you're saying too. I think that lull there with, I would, the lull the two songs that you're talking about, John. I think it is 10 minutes that kind of takes you away a little bit. So I would agree with that. But I would say that I was able to see more into this the more I listened to it. I think on initial listen, it's kind of all. It kind of all blends together a little bit, and I think we talked a little bit about this a couple weeks ago. Another album that's kind of like, it's REM. I remember talking about that, even though these sound totally different. But I remember listening to Murmur, thinking, it's all kind of samey, it's all kind of blending together. But the more I listened to it, the more I was like, no, it's not really at all. It's I pick, and that was a similar listening experience here. So it did take several listens to kind of get there. I also find myself like, if I put something on like at work or whatever and I'm not fully engaged, it can go by like that, and I'll just be like, what did I just listen to? Like, did I like that? I think I did, but so in this sense, this album this album can easily fall into the background. So I needed to give it a little bit more attention.
Are you like me, Matt, that whenever that happens, you like earmark, I'm gonna listen to this second. Going to have to listen to it in a completely different environment. That's how I always.
Yeah, I try to, and mostly it's just like, because I can't. It's almost like I can't be doing anything else. I have to just be listening to it on a walk or in the car, But if I'm doing work, or if I have something, if I have something else, I'm checking email. If I'm thinking, if I have a game on in the background or something, it's going to be much harder. I'm not going to be able to synthesize it as much if I didn't gave it more
sense.
Attention. Yeah. So
also, I'm seeing here on the Wikipedia that Herbie Hancock guested on Hunter and the Hunted and played a synth solo on that.
Nice.
I like that song. So,
we just talked about Rocket on the video the other week. So synchronicity there. But also the subtitle we should add is parentheses 81, 82, 83, 84. So that seems to be coming up when you search for the album and the title.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and Matt, I sat and listened to this album. I tried, especially in the cold listens, I always kind of try and focus and not do other things, but it still didn't work for me. So.
Yeah. Well, that's what also I would say too. It's really hard. That's why I like the fact that we have now given ourselves permission to listen to these albums multiple times if we want to. It's very hard for me just to listen to one album and be like, fall in love with it. It's got to hit that. It's got to be like a Beatles record, you know what I mean?
Especially
like,
this week, we had a lot of albums that benefited from re-listens for me this week.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah.
Yep. So can you judge an album after one listen? A consensus on the show says no, probably not.
Well, I think there's certain albums that are so good, you're like, oh my god, that one like blows me away right off the bat. But I would never want to rule out an album.
I mean,
there's even albums I hated on this podcast that when I listen, the one that always comes to mind for me is the first time I heard Chelsea Girl by Nico. I really had a negative, and I remember going back and listening to it probably like 7 or 8 months later after I kind of got an idea of, I think I know what they were going for there. And I wouldn't say I liked the album after that, but I was able to say, what really hated about this album was the damn strings. And like, if I could just get past the strings, there's interesting stuff going on here. So, I mean, there are times where that happens for me. And it's actually, as we do more albums, right, I'm finding that there are albums I'm going back to and I'm appreciating them more for their context, maybe even more so than just whereas before I was just listening to them for the album in isolation, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So
And there's so
Okay.
many more albums to judge it against also.
And that helps me at least because I'm a history guy, right? And so like the context can change a narrative for me and make me listen to things differently.
Yeah, and I think this is the last time we're covering Simple Minds. I don't think we're getting to the one that's got the "Don't You Forget About Me" song is on the 1985
Breakfast
album
Club soundtrack.
"Once Upon a Time."
I think we covered the Breakfast Club soundtrack though.
We do.
Do we?
We're doing soundtracks.
I think we have one soundtrack if I remember. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm going nuts.
I don't remember that. I'm going to have to fact check that.
Actually, I'm sorry. That song is not on their that record.
Yeah, it's on the
so-
Breakfast Club soundtrack.
Yeah, I thought it might have been a double thing, but okay, never mind. It's the same. It's just the same year that it came out, so I made an assumption. So
Cutting
my
inside.
bad. Yeah, there you go. So
Okay.